And now, from the Room 111 studios, it's Hacking Engagement with James Sturdivant.
Hey there, listener. Welcome back to the Hacking Engagement podcast. I'm so glad you're here. It's heartbreaking to hear about all the talented educators who are strongly considering cashing in their chips and exiting the classroom. That's not a good thing. I'm hearing a lot about this lately. Their students need them, and quitting may not be the right move for discouraged educators. I'm not saying that it is the right move for some. Maybe it is the right move for some, but it might be the wrong thing for you if you're discouraged. Now, I can say this with confidence because I vamoosed from education after my 7th year. And anybody that's listened to this podcast, I've mentioned it on numerous occasions, but I left after my 7th year. I was fortunate to be able to hightail it back into the classroom after just a 6-month hiatus. If you quit now, you may never return, even if you want to. A few years after my rather intense and thankfully brief exile, I had the opportunity to hear Jim Mahoney speak at a professional development. I think this was in the late 1990s. I was excited to hear him because he was the superintendent at my home school, where I went to school in Eastern Ohio. I hadn't met him yet, but my mom and dad knew him, and they liked him. They spoke highly of him. So 2 sentences into Jim Mahoney's presentation, man, I was hooked. The guy was engaging, funny, and highly relevant. But what I vividly remember about his presentation was one incredibly animated part when he was talking about teacher frustration. He clenched his fist, he scrunched his face, and then he empathized. As he was clenching and scrunching, he said the following: "When you folks," we were an audience of K-12 educators, "start wondering, why do I keep doing this?" And then the rest of his presentation was a powerful answer to this rhetorical question. It was a pure shot of educational adrenaline. I left that auditorium thinking, man, am I glad I'm back in the classroom. I'm not leaving again till retirement. Now, Jim and I later connected, and, we catch up with one another, at least annually. I love this guy. I'm not alone. Jim Mahoney is education royalty in the state of Ohio. And he talks about his resume on the podcast, and it's impressive, as well as diverse. But that's not why I invited him on this show. Jim just authored a book called To Lead is to Teach. If you or anyone you know are considering leaving the classroom, this book will probably give you hope and will at least give you pause. If you're not considering leaving, read it anyway. Be inspired and feel great about being part of this magical calling. I help retired educators make awesome health and lifestyle choices. My name is James Sturdivant. I taught high school for 34 years. I'm over 60. I'm in great shape, and I feel fantastic. I would love for you to take my coaching on a free 21-day test drive. Just navigate over to theretiredteachercoach.com and sign up. It's time for you to reclaim your vitality. So here we are in the Room 111 studios on a 23 degree day. I mean, the skies are kind of cloudy. We had a big snow last night. And I'm here talking to another former teacher whose name is Jim Mahoney. Say hello, Jim.
Hey, hi, everyone.
And Jim Mahoney remembers this vividly, and so does Jim Sturdivant. I remember on Sunday nights when I was teaching, when that snow would come rolling in, I'd start rubbing my hands together saying, baby, I don't have to go to work tomorrow. Do you remember those days?
Hey, there was nothing like a snow day for kids and for teachers. And, there was something magical about it.
There's nothing like your employer saying, I don't want you to come in today, but I'm going to continue to pay you. That's a great feeling. Hey, how much snow you got? I got about 4 inches in Delaware County. Jim's just south of me in Franklin County. What do you got?
Yeah, probably about 3 to 4 inches. And I have to laugh, Jim, when you talk about that, because of all the things I got to do as superintendent, the one that was the most magical to kids was being able to call school off for snow days.
That's interesting, but there's a big but coming on that. I can just smell it. You probably had to be woke up at 3 a.m. a lot to make this decision.
It's true.
That's a massive trade-off.
Yeah, what most of your listeners may not know is Jim grew up where I became superintendent, so he knows the places that I used to meet the transportation supervisor. It might be 4:30 in the morning, and we're checking out a few key roads, calling a few township trustees before we made a final decision, because we had to make it before 6 a.m.
Yeah.
Because we had to get it to the radio stations, because that's how it was announced, and to the television station where they would scroll it. Obviously, this is before. Now they just quickly post it on the internet.
That's right. Well, I want to say something here that might not mean a darn thing to the listeners, but Jim and I are from the hill country, and we're living up here in the prairie of central Ohio. But down there in the hill country, they got a boatload of snow. I think they got about a foot of snow last night.
Yeah, they did.
Okay, so listen, man, you have been around the block when it comes to education. Describe your diverse education background. It's pretty diverse.
Well, you know, interestingly, this next year, well, actually, this year will mark 50 years.
Damn.
Damn,
that's impressive. Congratulations.
What I didn't know is that those 50 years, really, I've always been a teacher. Mm-hmm. The context has been different. But that's probably the thing when I talk a little bit about this book that I published this last fall, was really about the power of teaching, and that it never changed, that I had different roles as principal and superintendent and a nonprofit leader at Battelle for Kids, the founding
mm-hmm.
executive director. But in all those roles, I really was the lead teacher. You know, I get a kick out of this, Jim. I know you've heard this old adage. It used to irritate me. It'd be those who can do, mm-hmm. those who can't teach. Well, I'd like to add another one. Those who can't teach can't lead. Because what I found interesting is even over the years, sometimes business folks would privately acknowledge to me they hope their kids didn't become teachers because it didn't pay enough, didn't have enough respect. And I used to silently laugh to myself thinking, if you're any good as a business leader, that's exactly what you are.
Heck yes, it is.
Because good teachers are good leaders,
uh-huh.
and good leaders are good teachers. They go hand in hand. It is hard to do one without the other. Well, so really, while I've gotten the privilege of serving in lots of different roles as an educator, I've never not been a teacher.
Well, we got to list the roles, man. I mean, that's the point of this question, because it's important to understand your incredible diverse background.
When I first started in the 70s as a middle school teacher and a coach,
right,
and then served as an elementary principal,
that's right,
and then a middle school secondary principal, and then as assistant superintendent in the district office, and then 10 years as a local superintendent, and then another 5, you know, these just add up. This is 5 years as a county superintendent, and then I got the opportunity after those 30 years, and this came all after having served in the Army first as an Army officer a long, long time ago.
Wow.
But then I got the opportunity of a lifetime to serve as the founding executive director of Battelle for Kids. Mm-hmm. Battelle Memorial Institute, which is the largest not-for-profit in the world, made their largest donation ever to an effort to create Battelle for Kids. They put $10 million into it, and it was to work with school systems in Ohio back then, 20 years ago, to improve student achievement, and it became much bigger than that. It became self-sustaining, and I was able to do that for 15 years. And now for the last 5 years, I've been an executive in residence and assistant professor at Ohio University. So I've just had a lot of different roles.
So that's 50 years.
Tell you,
So that's 50 years.
That's 50 years. That's
right.
Exactly right. I feel blessed because I still have juice.
You do. I mean, like Jim, I'm going to tell you something, man. What are you like? How old are you?
71.
Wow. I mean, I don't feel like you sound, like you look, like being around you is any different than when I met you 20 years ago.
That's good. I don't feel like I have any less energy.
No.
I had class this last week for 2 days.
Uh-huh.
I'm a part-time faculty member with the Police Executive Leadership College and doing leadership foundations with senior officers from around the state, and then classes that I teach at Ohio University. I have class this Saturday. I still look forward to it.
No doubt.
Planning for it.
No doubt.
And thinking about, it's just that now I have a lot more resources to help me than what I had when I first started.
And wouldn't you agree? I mean, I've gotten into trouble sometimes when I start a sentence like this, but wouldn't you agree that when you leave those classes at OU, that you have a certain just jolt of energy? There is just a uptick in adrenaline that you get when you stand in front of your students and interact.
Absolutely. That's part of what extroverts do. And
introverts. Some introverts do it too,
well,
man.
They do.
Yeah.
I was going to point out one of the best people I ever presented with. We were talking, we were doing a week-long series, and after about the fourth night, he's telling me he's an introvert. I said, oh my, he was so good with people, so good with students. I said, I don't understand. He said, the difference is this. He said, every night we finish, part of the reason I can't get together late, I just need to go
decompress.
Lay down.
I'm kind of like that.
Decompress. And he said, and you're ready to go again.
Yeah.
And
I'm kind of like that.
It does create energy.
Yeah, you got it, my man.
When it goes well, it does.
Well, listen, we need to handle this next prompt pretty quickly because I want to get into your book. But describe our connection.
Our connection goes back to where I knew actually Jim's dad before I knew Jim, because Jim had graduated from John Glenn High School and had gone by the time I had moved there. And I got to know Jim's dad, who was a terrific teacher and one of the greatest community connectors I ever met. And the lessons I learned to him about the power of communication and connecting, to this day, if you look at Muskingum University and East Muskingum schools in the village of New Concord, there are a set of walking trails there that are a tribute to Jim's dad, who demonstrated leadership absolutely with teaching and the skills that came with it. So that's how I first got to know Jim indirectly. And then when I met him 20-some years ago at a Jennings event, we just connected. And I have no doubts, had we talked together, we would have enjoyed it. We're of the same ilk.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. That's a high compliment. Now, this is something that you think about. You think about it a lot. You talk about it a lot. You present on it. You read about it. You write about it. What worries you right now about the state of American education? And then on the flip side of that, what gives you hope? I'm anxious to hear what you have to say because I have a contribution as well.
Yeah, I have to tell you, my answer today is different than it would have been 2 years ago. Today, in large part because of the pandemic, my biggest worry is whether or not we're going to lose the public in public education.
Right.
Because when there is no public anymore for public education, then Horace Mann's dream of the greatest equalizer of all will have been disbanded.
Damn right.
My deepest fear is that we are losing public education. And along with that, of course, is just the impact this pandemic is having on the social and emotional health of kids.
It is incredible. Keep going, man.
Yeah, so many are worried about the academic, our legislature. So many are worried about, the academic, but I'm going to tell you that's the least of our worries. It is the profound impact on the social, emotional welfare of kids over the last 2 years, the new habits, the new everything. And I think it's going to have a generational effect and maybe longer. So that's my deepest fear. My deepest fear is that there are going to be some unforeseen consequences and some foreseen ones that may remove the public, because without public support of public education, we don't have it.
Okay, I want to say something here that you may or may not endorse. And I'm not one of those guys who complains about the younger generation. I find the younger generation typically to be invigorating, and I love every generation of student that I've taught. But one thing that concerns me about this crop of students I'm dealing with, college undergrads right now, is there's a fragility to them. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, and I think that it clearly comes out in lots of different ways that people are concerned about the real resolve, and that. So I understand that. I'm just not sure it's true, because I think the fragility rests with adults' non-belief in what students are capable of, mm-hmm. and the resilience they really can have, and the toughness that can still exist. Look, I listen to people talk about this in the military, and this isn't to relive the days of basic training and all of those things, but I just think there are some true things that if you want somebody to have confidence, they have to have competence. They got to get through something hard. And it's not about making things easy for people. So I think the easier and the less expectations we have for someone, we contribute to what is fragility.
Okay, let me interject here. It's important for you and my listeners to hear this. That was an observation, not a complaint.
Yes.
That I made. And when I say why I say that is because every time I recognize something in my students, I look at it as an opportunity, as opposed to just sitting around bitching about it or bitching about the younger generation. So when I see a fragility in students, here's what I look at. They need me. They need me more than they did 5-10 years ago. And I love that challenge. The thing that I have noticed, and this is troubling to me, is I'll often get a message from a student who is, not going to come to class tomorrow, not going to get an assignment done, whatever, but I could kind of write the email. I could kind of write the message. I know what's coming. I've read the script enough that I could write it out. And so that concerns me, but it is not something that I am negative toward that student. It is something
right.
I think.
What's the context, the environment in which we're growing up in? I watch kids all the time. Again, it's not to glorify earlier years, but
right.
There was a certain point where you just, go play, and kids got organized and did things. And now everything is organized for them.
No kidding.
They've lost something.
I'm so glad you said that, because I went to my dental hygienist the other day, who's in her 40s, and she was talking about her kids' schedule, and they're in all these travel sports teams, and I just could not even fathom David Sturdivant, my father, saying, "Oh, well, this weekend we're driving to Cincinnati and we're spending the weekend because my son has a basketball game and he's 13 years old and it's going to take the weekend and we're going to get a hotel." My parents' idea of a travel sports team was you got on your bike and you rode to practice. And I'll bet you that that's something that concerns you too.
Well, we're specializing at a very early age.
Yeah.
Parents absolutely want to do right by their kids, and there are some new opportunities that didn't exist at one time. But I do think about, I'm wondering today, I hope there's a bunch of 11, 12, 13-year-olders that are out there with snow shovels hitting the driveways and see how much money they can make today. Mm-hmm. I hope we haven't lost that.
Yeah, right. Well, hold on. So we talked about the downside. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is the resilience of kids and the resilience of adults to adapt to whatever situation is and to make the best of it. Mm-hmm. I think of this as one, and this is a bit of a ramble, but I can remember when I was getting ready to go to the Army. Now, I was going to the Army as a second lieutenant after having graduated from Ohio State and ROTC. And I remember my dad, I was moping around. He got after me. He was a World War II veteran. And he said, well, what are you moping about? He said, they're almost paying you as much money as I make now after working my whole life. And he said, when I left this town, it was World War II, and I know if I was ever coming back.
That's right.
And he said, get out of here. I'm going to laugh when I think about it. But it was true. So what gives me hope is imagine in World War II what young men faced then and the uncertainty. So I'm always hopeful by the people who live where we are blessed to live, that whatever circumstances are presented, I would never, ever underestimate the resilience and will of the human spirit to accomplish great things.
Okay, I love it. I'm going to give you mine. I think teachers are a lot better than they used to be.
No question about that.
And I'm going to tell you, this is totally anecdotal, but when I was in school, I did a lot of remembering and forgetting, a lot of it. And that's not encouraged anymore. I wrote tests without any thought whatsoever to what I was doing. I was kind of like doing them the way I did them, or taking the guy's test that used to teach the class and giving it again. And there was a lot of that. You can't get away anymore with being a lazy teacher. You just can't.
I so agree with you. I sat through a middle school social studies class a couple of years ago, and I just marveled at this young man, what he was doing. I thought, I couldn't do that without a lot of learning, because he had incredible applications for kids. He had numbers of tools that he used that didn't even exist when I taught. So I totally agree with you. So the opportunities are the tools that you have are so much greater.
Oh, big
and the
time.
Skills that people have to be successful today are so much broader.
Hey, where did you go to high school?
I went to a little high school in Monroe County, southeastern Ohio, called Woodsfield.
Okay, how many kids did you graduate with?
Oh, probably 54.
Okay, beautiful. What were the foreign languages that are probably still taught at Woodsfield High School?
We had one. I don't know if that's still true or not. It was French.
Okay, beautiful. Perfect. All right, now here's the beauty of today. You're Jim Mahoney, but you're 17 years old and you're in Woodsfield, Ohio right now, and you really are interested in learning Arabic. By gosh, you can do that now. You can find a way to learn something, even if it's not taught in your building. That is just a huge leap in the way learning is done.
Here, let me give you a practical leap that happened last month. When I taught sixth grade social studies nearly 50 years ago, I don't remember the book, but in the sixth grade, it was kind of a world cultures. But I guarantee you there was a chapter in that book that said something like, our neighbors to the east.
Right.
And it showed all these Chinese on bicycles and with Mao jackets.
Yeah.
And so that would have been the chapter. I'm sure that was it. And to have told me back then that last month, fast forward 50 years, I did a presentation and had an audience of teachers from Hong Kong, Beijing, Macau, California, and New Zealand. And we had a conversation. I couldn't even have imagined that in my earlier self.
No.
So the tools to be able to do that and to connect and learn and share are so much more enormous. And the learning's not only faster, but the things that we can now do with it and the expectation, because it's not about learning and forgetting, and the difference between a C student and an A student is who forgets it faster.
Hey, I'm just going to go off on a slight tangent that you're going to love. I mean, you're going to love this tangent, and I'm going to let you do some yakking, and then we're going to get right to your book, I promise, but I have to address this. You hear a lot about teachers leaving the profession. I'm going to tell you a quick story, then I want you to talk about this issue for a minute. You probably don't know this about me. In 1993, I think I was like, 32 years old, been teaching for 7 years, kind of hit the 7-year itch. It's like, what the heck am I doing in this job? I'm making, my income is not based at all on on what I've done. It's based on years experience, education level. I don't really want to be a head coach, don't want to be a guidance counselor, don't want to be an administrator. I'm just going to be a teacher for the next 25 years. I can't accept that. I left. I actually went into sales, and I was selling business equipment. And for about 3 weeks, I loved it. And then I hated it. And I missed the class so much. I missed the students so much. And I worry that some of the folks that are exiting stage right might not have the reentry opportunity that I had and might go through the same process. And talk about this teacher exodus we keep reading about.
Well, it's real, and it's because if you throw enough, first of all, I'm going to make an assumption because I believe this is true, that the people who enter public service do it because they want to make a difference. That is hardwired into them. Mm-hmm. And when we make the barrier so difficult for you to stay in it,
no kidding,
that you finally say, I've had it. I'm done.
Right.
People exit. And that's a real issue. And it's both, people still leave if they have a bad boss.
Yeah.
And then all these other hurdles that we put in front of it. And so lots of people are, and it's. I think there's a whole thing around public service, and you imagine being a teacher, a police officer, people who serve the public. At some point, say it's just not worth it because of the barriers they have, and so I do think the exodus is. Look, we can't get substitute teachers everywhere now.
That's right.
And you just show up. And so part of this exodus is all the barriers that we have created, including this most recent one, which is a bill that now we need to have syllabi and everything transparent. I'm all for transparency.
Right.
But I have to laugh when they think that somebody's showing their lesson plan.
We've had that discussion.
Going to, do anything. It's just another hurdle of confusing activity for accomplishment.
Hey, listen.
And so we are losing people. So that's the bottom line.
My advice. I'm sorry to cut you off. My advice to anybody who's going through that equation in their head right now, and I bet there's a lot of people going through that equation. Don't make that decision hastily. I mean, don't make it on a Monday morning when you thought you were going to get a snow day and you were watching the NFL playoff games the night before banking on one. Don't make that decision until you sit through a graduation ceremony and then you see those kids that you used to have walking across that stage. Be prudent about making that decision.
And you'll make your own calculus. Look, I can promise you, I used to say when I first started teaching, you couldn't have taught anywhere in Ohio and made less money.
Right.
I worked at the aluminum plants as a steel worker in the summers in college.
Oh, I bet that was hell.
And
oh.
They were very, very robust. And when I started teaching, I could have doubled my salary doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I made $6,400, and I could have been a steel worker at a minimum of $10,000 to $12,000 then. And at times it was attractive. And there were always those inflection points that at the end of the day caused me to think about it. But I can really look back now with the benefit of time and say, wow, how blessed am I? I've gotten to teach for nearly 50 years, and I'm not Pollyannish about it. It's like every movie has some bad scenes.
That's right.
There's some scenes in my movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, overall it's been a pretty good movie because I've gotten to do what I enjoy, and that's the attempt to make a difference in helping others. And my biggest insight in writing this book was oftentimes we, as students, we credit teachers having helped us do this and that. But the truth of it is the person who was helped the most by my teaching was me.
Amen, brother.
And I just didn't know it. Emerson had it right when he said that it's impossible to give somebody else a bouquet of flowers and not retain some of the fragrance for yourself.
I love the one where they say you teach best what you need to learn most. I don't know who the heck said that, but I love that.
Well, it's true. When you have to really get ready for something and do that. So it is true.
So that's a perfect segue. Let's talk about your book, To Lead is to Teach. What inspired you to write this book?
I think probably some of my experiences from learning from others. I guess the book was really written, my intent, and the readers will be the ultimate judge of this, was to inform, illustrate, and inspire. The inform was I've been blessed to always have been a reader. So I included some of the best examples I could think of from lessons I've learned from people who were great researchers and writers. And then I infiltrated this with lots of stories that are real, because stories connect people and stories of others connect people. And the illustrations, then I put practical examples that any teacher, principal, not-for-profit leader, anybody who's working with groups of people can use. Very practical examples to engage folks. So at the end of the day, I couldn't have done this when I was 20-some. Mm-hmm. It came after a long time and with lots of experience. And I don't pretend to suggest this is the way, but it's intended to be interesting for someone to read and to cause them to think about things, to have ideas. But the central thesis always comes back to this, that great teaching and great leading are the same. And that if I ask somebody, well, think of the best teacher you ever had. What did they do? And people will say things like, well, they expected much of me, they encouraged me. And then if I were to say, well, think of the best boss you ever had, right, what would they say? They'd say the same things. Mm-hmm. So that was the whole thesis of it, because we had a researcher, Robert Quinn, who worked with us at Battelle for Kids, and he studied highly effective teachers as part of a project we did in 3 states. And Robert Quinn has written for years books about highly effective organizations and highly effective CEOs. And he told us, he said, after studying these teachers, he said, there's no difference. The same skills that are required of a CEO are required of a teacher. And we sort of flipped that. So well, then that means the same skills that are required of a CEO are the ones they need to emulate from teachers. Mm-hmm. So we always assume that we want to be like the CEO. And I think, oh, that's nonsense. The good CEO needs to be like the great teacher.
Hey, listen, man, you and I grew up in a time where there wasn't YouTube and there wasn't social media. And there's pluses that have come from all that technology and all those different platforms. One great plus is you have exposure to so much more. A negative is that people's attention spans are virtually non-existent. They're just seconds. They're seconds. So when I was growing up, I remember hearing for the first time someone say an elevator pitch, and I'm like, what are you talking about, an elevator pitch? Well, it's the concept that you are trying to promote an idea and you just have a brief period of time to do it. And I thought that was kind of weird. And I thought that was kind of like, it's hard for me to envision that being the case. Well, guess what? That is the case today. I mean, people have virtually no attention spans. So I want you to provide my audience right now with an elevator pitch about your book.
Okay, I'm going to highlight it very quickly with a short story. I met a professor in Atlanta a number of years ago who had just won a teaching award. And I'm sitting at his table as a stranger, and he starts to tell me about it. They had a picture of him in the paper. He was at North Carolina University, and he had someone call him because this professor used to be a high school English teacher in Pennsylvania. And he had a girl in class who saw this article who now lived in North Carolina and said, "Is that you?" "Oh, yes, yeah. It is." And they made a chance to reconnect, and they did. And he thought about that class and how much he loved that class. And as a senior gift he gave to everyone, he gave a 4-page handout, said 25 books we never got to that you need to read, with a short paragraph descriptor of each one. And he meets this young lady now grown up in her 40s, and they talk, have a wonderful conversation. As she gets ready to leave, she opens her purse and pulls out this 4-page handout that had been opened and closed countless times with little notes she had handwritten in the sides. And she looked at him and said, "I read all 25 of these books. When do we get our next assignment?"
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Teaching is the gift that keeps on giving. Leading is the gift that keeps on giving. And this book is chock full of ideas to do it well from lots of other people.
All right, beautiful.
Because we need to just remember that you are going to, you will be remembered the way you live and lead. That is how it happens. So
Amen.
This gives you ideas that I think will interest you and give you practical applications to engage others.
Okay, and that leads into my next question. Why should a busy educator read it? You just said it.
It's relevant. It's interesting, hopefully, from the reader's point of view. And the feedback I've gotten has been very, very good. So that's intended because it kind of gets, don't be a passenger in your own life. And at the end of the day, part of it is you can get ideas from others. And I like T.S. Eliot had a wonderful quote. He said, "In the beginning is my end. In my end is my beginning." So I'm much more closer to the end than I am the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But those go together.
Mm-hmm.
I've been very, very blessed to do something I have thoroughly enjoyed that I got to apply my strengths to. And I tell young people all the time, the best advice I can give you is to find out what your talents are and find out ways to apply them. Gallup often just talks about talents and strengths. A talent becomes a strength when you practice it. And part of it is helping young people to find out what are their talents and then having the opportunity to do that. I was fortunate. I stumbled into something that has continued to be a lifelong pursuit in trying to become better at what I do.
What's something that you discovered about yours? I'm so curious about how you're going to answer this. What's something you discovered about yourself in the writing process?
I think what I discovered is that I was the main beneficiary of all of my teaching. That wasn't my intent. My intent was to help others.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, everybody who's even remotely thinking about leaving the teaching profession. Did you hear that last statement? I mean, I love that statement. I'm sorry I cut you off there, but I was so impressed with what you said, and it's so relevant to a conversation or a question I posed earlier. Man, I think that's what I was missing when I left teaching. You know, I just missed the kids. I missed the atmosphere. I missed the intellectual stimulation. I missed all that. That's interesting, James.
No one misses the hassle, but I think you got to remember, the little school I taught at, my first group of kids were in 6th grade. Next year, the 7th grade teacher left. I went with them to 7th grade. Next year, the 8th grade teacher left. I went when the 8th grade. We did looping before it was called looping. I had the same group of kids for 3 years. And those kids, believe it or not, this pains me to say, but I laugh. They are all turning 60 this year.
Yeah, yep.
And I posted a picture of that class because that class is virtually unchanged in the 3 years that I had them in this very rural, stable community. And it was through that group that I found my own voice and passion. So the real thanks has nothing to do that I may have done for them. It is what they did for me.
Oh, man, I have to tell you this. This will tickle you. I have another podcast called The Retired Teacher Coach, which I told you about, and I a lot of times interview retired educators. And I interviewed this guy who's 88, and he started teaching at age 20. And he met a student the other day that's 85. A former student who's 85 years old.
I have to tell you, I have it. I need to give it to you. It's on a VHS tape. The only good thing I remember to do was to have somebody video this. At Muskingum, it was college then, I was teaching a graduate class, and I had 4 people come to class that night. Mm-hmm. Ellis Deitch, who had been John Glenn's teacher at New Concord,
who
at the time was well in his 90s.
Yeah.
A man named Glenn Pyatt. His grandson, who was a retired teacher, brought him. He was 95. He had taught for 70 years in Monroe County.
I remember that guy.
And there were 2 others, and they shared their experiences. And we videotaped it. They taught during the Depression, World War II, and during the Depression, they actually took crops from other people.
Right.
And Ellis Deitch talked about it one time. He not only was the head football coach, head basketball coach, he was also the chemistry teacher, the principal, and the school district treasurer. And they told these wonderful stories. Yeah. And I remember one of the teachers, this would have been back in the early 90s, one of the teachers walking out said to another teacher, "I promise I'm never going to bitch again." But you could tell these were people in their 90s, 2 of whom became the first people I ever sent 100-day birthday cards to.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that part of their longevity was due to doing something that they really believed in.
Oh, yeah.
And they couldn't have been more articulate. And I'd be willing to bet, I didn't think of the question, who was the biggest beneficiary of all they had done? I bet they would have answered themselves.
Oh, I love that, James. I love it. Now, this is something that struck me when I'm writing my books. It goes right along with what you just said. I was writing them with the 24-year-old Jimmy Sturdivant, rookie teacher, in mind. It's like, damn, I wish I would have had this book. I was reflecting back to that time. So you think back to when you were starting. Were you 20? How old were you?
When I started actually teaching, I was 22.
Okay. Perfect. I guessed right. If you could go back in time and talk to that young man, what would you tell him?
I'd say, first of all, you need to live and lead the way you want to be remembered, because you will be.
Yeah.
You will be. Your whole high school principal said something I always enjoyed when he'd talk to kids. He'd say, look, son, you can't talk yourself out of something you have behaved yourself into. And at the end of the day, it's about behavior. And it's the little things. And stay the course And if you're really enjoying it, just work on getting better every day. There's a new book. It's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list called Atomic Habits.
Yeah, I have that on my list at the library.
Yeah, and I just finished it, and I'm going to do book notes on it, but its premise is very simple. If you just make 1% improvement over time, you get really good at anything.
That's right.
And the goal ought to be to have processes that ensure just very small improvement. And don't get upset when you can't do things perfectly. And as long as you continue to enjoy it and are learning from it and are motivated by it, that's what really matters. That's being engaged and having work that really engages us. I have to tell you, I've met lots of people who made lots of money, but at the end of the day, were never really engaged in their work.
No.
And all of their money didn't necessarily provide them outlets that necessarily mattered.
No.
So at the end of the day, it's find out which talents are. Go do things that allow you to do them. Oftentimes I'll tell people to take Strength Finder, and it's not as a selection tool. It's about know thyself, and the question is not, well, find a certain job, but ask yourself, how can I apply my strengths in this role? Because there are lots of things, but you want to be using those, because when you do those, you're much more likely to be engaged. And that old adage about if you do something you love, you'll just never go to work.
That's
I
right.
still don't go to work. I got class this Saturday, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you got it, my man. Listen, if you're listening to this podcast and you're getting pumped up, that's good, because Jim tends to have that impact on people, particularly when he's giving a public presentation. But I'll wager that you will find his writing style incredibly conversational and motivational. You need to check out this book. Hey, one piece of advice for our listeners on the way out the door.
Don't be a passenger in your own life.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Everybody has a story, and everybody's story is interesting. And don't be a passenger in your own life.
And I'm going to add to that, don't you dare quit teaching too hastily. It's a damn good job.
Amen.
Take care, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
So here we are at the What You Can Do Tomorrow section, and it is short and to the point. Read Jim Mahoney's book. There's a link on my show notes. It's called To Lead is to Teach. Just go on Amazon and buy the sucker. And then share this with an educator who's struggling, because I'll bet you know one. I'll bet there's someone at your school who is really questioning whether they want to keep doing this job. Maybe share the podcast with them first, this podcast, and then share the book. Listen, man, teaching is awesome. You're going to have down times, but please don't make a hasty decision. Your students need you.
Show notes for this episode can be found at jamesalansturnevant.com. If you enjoy Hacking Engagement, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes.